everyone. Here is my presentation for my PTSD article for Professor Joy's abnormal psychology class. So the article that I'm talking about is called Neuropsychological Measurement of Inhibitory Control and Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder, an exploratory anticipated paradigm by Matthew Reinhard, Nathaniel Allen, Ling M. Wong, and Barbara L. Schwartz. So here is my introduction section. Okay, so the general problem. What general problem was being addressed? So there are very few studies out there that have examined response time, reactions to stimuli, and cognitive functioning in individuals diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. So that's one of the reasons why the study was conducted, to be one of the first of studies of this kind. And there also have been no studies examining anti-saccade task AS, which is a test that measures voluntary eye movement in individuals diagnosed with PTSD, which is another reason why this study is being conducted. Context. So what is the context? Individuals who are diagnosed with PTSD often have processing issues and difficulties responding to threatening situations. And there is now technology that can non-invasively monitor eye movement, which is the AS that we talked about on the previous slide, which can be used to assess attention bias to threats in individuals with PTSD. And then we have this little picture on the side to showcase some of the symptoms of PTSD for those who are unaware. Prior research. What prior research has addressed the issue? So previous studies have discovered that individuals who are diagnosed with PTSD differ in their ability to process faces from individuals without PTSD. This relates later in one of the experiments or parts of the experiment that is done in the study. And then these studies have also found that individuals with PTSD have hyperactivity in the amygdala, prefrontal cortex, anterior cingulate cortex, and thalamus. And then some studies have found that individuals with PTSD focus more on negative words, emotions, and facial expressions than more positive or neutral ones. Right. And then the hypothesis. What specific hypotheses, if any, were tested in this study? So there was one hypothesis posed for this study. Individuals diagnosed with PTSD would make more AS errors and be slower at responding compared to individuals without PTSD. This would indicate that individuals with PTSD have impairment in their mental processing compared to individuals without PTSD. Right, so the next section is the method. So the sample. What kind of sample was studied? So the population that the sample was drawn from was patients from a Veterans Affairs Medical Center, or VAMC. Participants had to be between the ages of 18 and 60 and have served in the military. Participants falling under the category of PTSD had to be documented as being diagnosed with PTSD by a medical professional and fit the criteria of several diagnostic tests that were given to them at the beginning of the study. The sample was then split into two groups, those diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and those without PTSD, which was the control group. And the sample sizes were 19 in the control group and 17 in the PTSD group. Interventions. So what interventions were used includes therapeutic interventions. There were no interventions introduced in this study, so this does not apply. Right, measurements. So all of the data throughout this study was collected by a sensomotoric eye tracker. So then there were two different little tests that were conducted throughout this experiment. So the standard condition one, participants completed 15 trials of looking at a central circle with two squares to the left and right that would be replaced by the circle randomly, which can be seen by A in this picture right here. And then the face condition, participants completed 32 trials of looking the same way as the faces shown on screen. These faces had both neutral and fearful expressions. And so this one can be seen by B down here in the picture. All right, methodology and purpose. How does the methodology relate to the purpose of the study? So the goal of the study was to study reaction time and attention bias in individuals diagnosed with PTSD. The standard condition experiment was conducted to measure the reaction time and mental processing of participants, whereas the face condition experiment was conducted to see if individuals with PTSD had an attention bias towards the faces that had fearful expressions rather than neutral expressions. All right, results. Major findings. What are the major findings pertinent to the study's hypotheses? For the standard condition little test, the PTSD group had a slightly slower reaction time to AS and more errors compared to the control group. PTSD and slowed reaction time is trending toward significance, but nothing can be concluded without further research. And then in terms of the face condition experiment, the PTSD group had a slightly slower reaction time and more errors compared to the control group. There was no significant correlations between the PTSD group and emotion of the facial expressions. And then other interesting findings. What other interesting findings emerged, if any? There was one that I did find to be interesting. The PTSD group had higher levels of depression symptoms compared to the control group. These was conducted at the beginning of the experiment with those surveys and diagnostic criteria for individuals with PTSD. And compared to the control group, they had higher levels of depression symptoms, which does make sense as that can result from being diagnosed with PTSD, like feelings of depression because of all the stress that's going on in your life. I thought that was interesting to note. All right, in discussion. Status of hypothesis. What is the status of the study's hypothesis? So, to reiterate the hypothesis for this experiment, individuals diagnosed with PTSD would make more AS errors and be slower at responding compared to individuals without PTSD. This would indicate that individuals with PTSD have impairment in their mental processing compared to individuals without PTSD. So the study strongly indicated that individuals with PTSD made more AS errors and were slower at responding compared to individuals without PTSD. The implications. What are the implications of the findings, practical and or theoretical? So individuals diagnosed with PTSD may have impairment in their mental processing compared to individuals without PTSD. So the limitations. What are some limitations of the study? There was a relatively small sample size. There weren't a lot in each of the groups, which is not desirable in terms of experiments. You want to have as many people as you can to see if you can apply it to more people. The experimenters are not sure if there is retest reliability in their eye tracking procedure arrangements, which is a bit worrisome because you would hope that you would be able to replicate the process of an experiment. If you're unable to, you can't know if it actually is a reliable experiment or not. They did not conduct an examination of learning disabilities or educational history of the participants, so they're not entirely sure if all of the difficulties in the experiment were because of the PTSD or for other factors, and they only had a limited number of face trials, which it would be beneficial for them to have included more to have like a wider variety of facial expressions that could affect individuals diagnosed with PTSD. All right, and then suggestions. What directions might be suggested for further investigation? So a study could be conducted to investigate how to have retest reliability and eye tracking procedure arrangements. They could delve into learning disabilities and educational histories and participants diagnosed with PTSD in future studies. And then they could also conduct studies that attempt to measure brain behavior performance rather than relying on self-monitoring and personal testimonies, because people can be very unreliable when they're reporting things about themselves, and especially like any like processing difficulties they may be having. So finding like a very analytical way to measure that would be beneficial. And then here are my citations. Here's my work cited for the article that I'm talking about. And then here are my links to the image that I used for the PTSD symptoms, and then the picture I got from the article. So thank you so much for watching my video.